Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Topical Talkology.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you, Andy?
I'm tired, actually. I didn't finish work until midnight last night, so I'm feeling a little bit probably intolerant today when we were getting our coffee, actually. But
such is the price of dedication.
Yeah, but it's also one of those things about being aware of it and learning to control those emotions and things like that.
So too much work is bad for you?
Well, of course it is, but the thing is,
balance.
You also have to do what needs to be done, though, when the time comes. I mean, in fact, actually, while we're on the subject, people talk about work-life balance. Now, when it may be my generation, it may be my age, but my idea of work-life balance was work your ass off for the first few, for the God knows how many years leading up to it, and then actually
drop dead.
Basically, but then again, you get the rewards later. You get the rewards later on in life. But this whole millennial world that we live in is a little bit about having more flexibility, more space, more free time, more safe space. I'm not used to it. I mean, as I've said to you in a previous podcast before, our role as parents is to actually bring up our kids for them to be strong enough to be able to cope in the world.
Would you want your kid to follow what you just said? Work like crazy for many years and then retire exhausted? Would you want them to do that?
Well, my daughter worked an 87-hour week last week because she had to. Now, that wasn't the case this week. And she's going to Marrakesh with work on Sunday, and she's only 18, but she worked an 87-hour week last week, and in some ways I call that character building.
Well, presumably that's going through a phase, though, is that you wouldn't expect her in 20 years' time to be working 87-hour weeks?
Of course not. I'm expecting her to probably have a lot more time off in about 20 years' time, but it's what she had to do last week to be able to get the job done that she was doing for the person she works for. Just
like junior doctors, I remember starting at 8 o'clock on Friday morning if I had an on-call weekend, finishing at 6 o'clock on Monday evening.
And you know what? You're still here, you're still alive, you're still you haven't dropped dead yet.
Thanking God that there were no disasters along the way.
But I also know I know people who've actually led fairly healthy lifestyles. They haven't had a hugely stressful life, and they've had a stroke and they've dropped dead, and and actually it's not one. I probably know several occasions where that's happened.
I think the issue is that there is the principle of character building. There is the developing of good habits, because at the end of the day, unless you do something intensively, you tend not to develop the habit, and therefore working unbelievably hard for a period gets you used to a good work ethic and discipline. So that you can continue the principles, but with some form of control. Because the main issue is whether you're in control of what you're doing versus being a slave, versus being controlled by what you think you need to do.
Look, it's a case of, how you do anything in life is how you do everything in life. Although I'd probably have to challenge my daughter on that theory. I have to challenge that theory on my daughter, because at home she behaves like a typical millennial teenager sometimes, but then again she's got a very different work ethic to most people that I actually see even who are working full-time now. She just wants to learn everything she possibly can.
Well, that's because you're mixing.
At home, and the thing is, this is where probably my wife doesn't do herself any favours, is that she wants to feel significant in her role as a mother, so probably does more around the house for our daughter than she should do, and not make so, which makes me angry, because it doesn't make my daughter self-reliant, and almost comes to expect that if she leaves it long enough, my life will tidy it up or clear it up or do whatever, which is not the best learning experience for my daughter.
Well, that's right. So it goes back to my original adage that I tell everyone: people do to you what you let them, and that is one example of the fact that humans, just like any other living organism, is in desperate need of structure and control and boundaries. So if you don't set boundaries, then people will run randomly. So if boundaries are not set, it's for instance, kids Kids will often behave very well at school, but they're nightmares at home because helicopter parents or over-loving parents tend to spoil them, tend not to give them boundaries, so the kids don't know where their limits are. Whereas at school they know where the limits are. The teachers don't love them, so they just apply the rules logically. And if I tell the parents, just decide where you want the boundaries to be and apply them, then they come back to me as if I've delivered some kind of magic to them, and they say, my God, things are much, much better. And the kids themselves, to a person, they say, I feel better now, I know where the boundaries are. People are happy.
That's an interesting one, because when my wife and I never really gave our daughter as many boundaries in terms of curfew and everything, there was a level of trust that she probably knew that actually we'd like you home at this time, but we never gave her any restrictions on that. But it also gave her the autonomy to be able to actually make those level of decisions as to what was responsible for her to do, which is in some ways why she is who she is now. Now, the other, now as an 18-year-old with a daughter who now goes clubbing with her friends, as a parent, you're actually up until late at night sometimes wondering whether she's okay. So you're not getting. I'm getting less sleep these days, like when she was 2 years old or 1 year old, because as parents we do worry about that, but we can't control everything they do. I'm probably quite fortunate as a father, because she doesn't take drugs. She doesn't. She's not a huge drinker. She doesn't smoke. She doesn't do half the things that some parents have to go through with their kids.
That you know of. That you know of.
Well, that I know of. But then again, she's never behaved. She's never behaved any behavioural patterns that would lead me to think otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And the sign. And if you actually look close enough, the signs are there. Whether you choose to ignore them or accept them is entirely up to you.
Absolutely right. But I think along those lines, there is enormous pressure on kids now in terms of what's expected of them at school, and the increasing pressure, especially for ladies who are being told, look, now you have to do this exactly the same as boys do, and you're going to be having your careers first. Then the pressure that puts them under is one of the reasons why there's an increasing amount of self-harming and an eating disorder at school. So, for instance, in secondary school, at least half of the girls in the classes are going to have some form of eating disorder, whether it's anorexia, which is restriction diet and starvation. Reason being, if you can't control your environment, at least control your body, or bulimia, which is binging and vomiting. And in fact, it's such a common thing that there's even a sign called Russell's sign, coined by Professor Russell, which is people, usually ladies, putting their fingers down their throat and vomiting, so that the vomit pits their nails, and the pitting in the nails is called Russell's sign.
I'm not denying the symptoms of bulimia and anorexia and self-harming and things like that. But however, I disagree with you in terms of they're getting put under too much pressure, and I probably sometimes actually have to question whether they're actually being put under enough pressure. And the reason why is because if they can't handle the pressure at school, how the hell are going to handle the pressure in the outside world? And this is why everything's been leading up to these safe spaces that they have to have, or people getting easily offended by certain things. It's like this Waitrose editor of their magazine who's recently had to step down because someone had sent an
Sitwell.
email that offended them so much, even though it was a joke, and they got offended so much and were overly sensitive that they forwarded it on to someone, and it got published, and he's had to step down.
Well,
now, look,
it's actually go on. You
now,
first.
I don't particularly think it was. I don't think it was particularly funny what he did, and it's not my level of sense of humour. But the thing is, it doesn't mean he's going to actually do it. And here's the danger of doing things like that. You're going to get those people who've got real hatred, type views and beliefs, who are capable of doing something quite sinister and evil, and they will actually be more reluctant to actually. We'll be less likely to see it because they will hide it long enough until they don't anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll demonstrate it in their actions. So in some ways, there's a guy called Jordan Peterson, who's a clinical psychologist from Toronto University, who actually talks about, actually we welcome all type of freedom of speech, in terms of even hatred of freedom of speech, because then we actually know what people are thinking, and then we deal with it like that. Anyway,
he hates freedom of speech. You said?
No, he believes in freedom of speech. Even hates hate preachers.
Well, see, freedom of speech is different from unregulated speech. Big difference. This William Sitwell gentleman, actually, he reminds me a little bit of Philip Green, and I need to explain exactly why, because I don't want to be unfair to either. But Philip Green, as we discussed last week, one of the reasons he's come a cropper is because people don't like him, and if you're not liked, you're much more likely to be depressed from whatever position you're in, because people complain about you. And one of the reporters said that he joked about how come nobody's killed you, and this Sitwell gentleman said, why don't we kill all vegans, as a joke. And then clearly this offended the person that he sent it to, and she sent it as an example of hostility against vegans. As an example, she says, in quotes, she says not to be published, but of course it then went viral. Now, if you think about it, nice people don't joke about killing people, do they? But aggressive people, and more commonly psychopaths, do, because they think that's funny. I don't think jokes about killing people are particularly funny.
As I said, I don't think it was particularly funny. Because
you're not a psychopath.
Guy's a psychopath because I've never met him. But the thing is, I've been in a locker room, and the thing is, men, in some ways, they do make sick jokes like this, and I've heard, things 10 times worth being said. Yet, if you want to call it locker room humour, and there is a level of humour to it. Not necessarily always my humour.
Usually, those are not the nicer guys, though, are they? But they let it. People let it go because it is in the locker room. Yeah,
but you put all men in a group together. You got a lot of testosterone. People will laugh and joke, and they'll probably even agree. They probably look back and say, well, I don't really want to spend too much time with this guy, but it happens. But it doesn't mean. But the thing is, it's almost like men aren't allowed to be men and women aren't allowed to be women anymore. If that's what they want to choose, I believe in choice. If a woman does want to choose that she actually wants a high level position, then fine. You've got to make sacrifices to actually achieve that. Same as a guy. If you want to make sacrifices, you're going to have to be doing an 80-hour week in and week out, and expect that. If you want to get those results, because it's competitive out there,
but not to be forced to do something.
No. I don't believe in forcing anybody to do anything they don't want to do.
But one of the reasons.
But the thing is, there's a difference between force and there's a difference between choice. Just because you're caught between a rock and a hard place, there is still a choice between one or the other. So it's like the scenario of actually, who do you save? Do you save your best friend, or do you save your mother? From drowning if you have to save one of them.
But even choice is a danger, because even people don't want too much choice, even though they think they do. They actually don't.
No, they don't. It stresses people. It stresses people more, and then because there's a fear of missing out. What then tends to happen is that they don't make any decision at all.
That's right.
The most, and if you want to look at the most successful people, I suppose from the data, you'll find that those are the ones who are the non-conformists, the ones who actually are the risk takers, and you'll actually find as a whole that men statistically, based on data, take a lot more risks than women actually do, because women are more conformists.
Do you know,
in some ways, and one of the reasons is that's why they perform better in school and they perform better in education. But put them in the in the marketplace, where they actually have to go and work, and they actually have to be quite let's call it disagreeable, which is the term which is how it's often referred to, men are actually far more aggressive in that department than women are, which is why statistically there's less women